The First Amendment is one of the most important amendments in the Constitution. So why is it that the left is trying to censor it? We'll find out. My name is Sebastian Giraldo, and this is The Giraldo Show. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to The Giraldo Show. I am your host, Sebastian Giraldo. If you are joining me for the second episode of the podcast, I welcome you back. And for anyone who is new to the series, I welcome you to your very first episode of The Giraldo Show, the conservative podcast. Now, today's episode is going to focus on the First Amendment. And the reason I bring this up is because today, September 17th, 2019, is the anniversary of the completion and signing of the Constitution of the United States of America. The signing and completion of one of the most important documents in our country's history is today. And part of that Constitution is the Bill of Rights, which contains what I believe are the two most important amendments, the First and the Second Amendment. So we're going to go into what the First Amendment is, what it entails, and why the left media, liberal media, is trying to censor conservatives from speaking. So let's go ahead and get into the show. So I'm going to go ahead and read to you the First Amendment word by word from the Constitution of the United States of America. So, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That is verbatim what the First Amendment says. Now, let's go ahead and break it up a little bit. So, the first part, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That's pretty much, Congress has been adopted modernly to mean government. Therefore, it meant Congress as in the legislative branch of the government, but now it's been adopted in modern times to mean executive, judicial, and legislative branch. Government cannot make a law establishing a certain religion. That's what the first part says. The United States government cannot make a new law, say today, that says everyone must be Christian. That is unconstitutional. So that's the first part. The second part, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. So, again, Congress cannot make a law that prohibits the free exercise of freedom of speech. So no law can be placed that restricts speech, and that means any sort of speech. Now, you might be wondering, what about if someone incites violence directly, saying something like, I will pay you $500 if you go and murder this man? Well, that's not speech. That's actually a crime. That is a crime according to the law of this nation. So that is actually not speech, technically. Even though it is spoken, it is a crime. You cannot say that. Freedom of the press. Government can't restrict press. The press has the ability to say whatever they want about the president, about Congress, about whoever in the government they want, and the government have to accept that fact. They can't silence the press unless there's a case where the press might potentially release information that is considered extremely secretive. There are examples of press being not prohibited but limited that we will potentially get into in later episodes. Third part, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. Anybody can assemble peaceably. So peaceful assembly, peaceful protest. Government cannot intervene in that at all. And the last part, to petition the government for a redress of grievances. People can complain about the government. They can say whatever they want to the government. And the government cannot make a law saying that you cannot criticize the government or ask for something better. So that's pretty much what the First Amendment of the Constitution is. In my opinion, it is one of the most important amendments in the Constitution, and for obvious reasons. I wouldn't be speaking to you right now if I did not have the First Amendment. And the reason why I think it's so important to have this freedom of speech is because we need opinions from both sides. It is very important for there to be opinions not only of the conservative side, but of the liberal side. Democrats and Republicans deserve to have their say in the matter, no matter how right or wrong you think someone might be. Either way, there needs to be the same protection for both sides of the political party and for anyone who wants to complain or say whatever they're thinking of. The dangers of government prohibiting free speech, or at least putting limits on free speech, for example, on something such as hate speech, which is something that the left has been pushing forward as an agenda of theirs. They want to eliminate hate speech, which they consider as racism, bigotry, and offending people of the LGBTQ community. Pretty much they consider that as hate speech, and they want to be able to prohibit that. See, the problem with trying to prohibit that is that there are a lot of people, myself included, that do not agree with, for example, the transgender community. I respect people from that community, but I think that they, unfortunately, have a mental problem where they think that they are the opposite sex/gender that they were born. Sex and gender are one and the same. They're not, sex and or gender are not malleable. If you are a man, you are born a man, and if you are a woman, you are born a woman. That's just how biology says it. Science says that no amount of how much you want to think you are, or how much you think you are, is going to change the fact of basic biology saying you're a man or you're a woman. But transgenderism, gender studies, we'll get into that in a later episode. The problem is defining actual hate speech, because in many countries that are not the United States, in Canada, for example, or in Germany, they actually fine or potentially imprison people for hate speech. And you might be thinking, well, that might not be all that bad. The problem is who determines hate speech. Now that's the big problem, and why our founding fathers wanted to put this First Amendment, because you never know who's going to be the next person in charge. Let's say, for example, that our current president, Donald Trump, wanted to fine people who disagree with him. How much of a commotion do you think that would cause? It would be a riot. No one would support that. Because why? Because they're just being fined for spreading their own opinion. But for some reason, that's something that the left media and agenda is all about. They want to prohibit hate speech to the point where if you spew their quote-unquote hate speech, you're going to get fined or imprisoned. And you're not allowed to spread your own opinion, even if it's not hateful, even if it's truthful and honest. And that is extremely dangerous, and that's why I thank the Founding Fathers for putting that as a very first amendment. The first thing that they thought of was protecting our freedom of speech and making sure that government cannot intervene in that. So that's a very important thing. But now, in recent media, in recent examples, I should say, you see a lot of leftists and liberals trying to ban or prohibit certain types of speech, specifically speech that they don't agree with. Now, we'll get into some specific examples in a second, but let me just go ahead and generalize it real quick. If you are a conservative with a differing opinion on racism, in systemic racism, in police brutality, in gender studies, in abortion, in anything in climate change, in anything that you disagree with a leftist, there are a lot of people on that side of the party that think you do not have a right to speak because you are insulting people. But the question is, who determines what's insulting? That's why it's dangerous to have a restriction on freedom of speech, because anyone who's in power can decide what's insulting. One person might decide that everything's insulting. And the next person might decide that nothing is insulting. So we come to this point where if we didn't have these protections, we would have certain opinions that we wouldn't dare to say because we would be fined or imprisoned for them. And again, First Amendment, extremely important for us being able to spread our opinion and spread our ideas. Again, that's why I'm able to speak right now. If we had, say, a Democratic president that decided for a radical reason, I want to ban all speech that goes against my beliefs. I want to ban all conservative speech. That is going to be a riot for conservatives because they're not going to be able to spread their own opinions. Everyone's going to live under this umbrella of happiness and democratic beliefs, except for the other half of America who believe differently from them. So that's kind of a general viewing of what the liberal leftist agenda is on trying to censor speech. Now, I can get into a couple of examples. The first example that pops into my head, the obvious Steven Crowder. Now, Steven Crowder, big fan of him. He has a great podcast, Louder with Crowder. I suggest you listen to them. Subscribe to them on YouTube. Give them a like on whatever website or program they are on. But to put this into a concise story, Steven Crowder has conservative opinions, and there was one certain Mexican individual from Vox, Carlos Maza, who decided that he didn't like what Steven Crowder was saying about him. Steven Crowder was calling him a gay Mexican, which is true. I mean, his Twitter profile username is gay wonk, so he's kind of asking for it, and he describes himself as a liberal Marxist. So he's kind of asking for a little bit of an insult, but we're not going to get into that. Pretty much what happened was that Maza went on Twitter and he started complaining about how Steven Crowder was a bully, how he was trying to insult him, and how he was spreading hate speech. And he actually asked YouTube to censor them. So YouTube responds to Carlos saying, hey, Steven didn't violate any of our rules, regulations, whatever you want to call it. That didn't sit well for Maza. No, he decided to go back on Twitter and say YouTube promotes hate speech and continuously repeat that. So what YouTube eventually did was they started to demonetize some of Steven Crowder's content. And not only demonetize, they even started to try to delete or put copyright strikes on some of his content. So that's a big problem that I've been noticing from a lot of conservative media outlets. They're constantly getting copyright stricken, or they're getting banned from certain websites because their views are considered as hateful. For example, if I were to spread my pro-life argument and a woman was like, you can't decide what I do with my own body, I'm going to ban you. I'm going to copyright strike you for being offensive. You see how dangerous that is? It's something that, for right now, I'm very glad. Again, I keep repeating myself, but I cannot stress how important the First Amendment is. But there have been a lot of recent cases of the liberal media trying to censor, or at least try to restrict as much as possible, the conservative opinion. You see it a lot for political members such as Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro, another guy, Ben Shapiro Show, Daily Wire. You probably know about him if you're listening to this podcast right now. He's been banned from multiple universities because of his differing opinion. He's been called a Nazi even though he's Jewish. He's been called a fascist. He's been called everything that you could think of as an insult. And which is kind of ironic because the real fascists are them. They're trying to control all guns, for example, which we'll get into. The Second Amendment episode is going to be my next episode, so stay in tuned for that. Trying to control guns, trying to attack anyone who has differing opinion, shut them down, keep them quiet, pretty much anything so they can be the only opinion out there. Exactly what the fascists did. Fascists in Germany got into power, started taking over. Hitler said, you know what, we're going to get rid of all these differing opinions. Eventually, Nazism, fascism became the number one party in Germany as soon as he became president, or as soon as he somehow became president, because we all know what happened to Hitler. But, again, First Amendment, so important, which is why it's so ironic that you see a lot of liberals using their free speech to try to limit free speech from other people. And it's just so, I don't want to say the word disgusting, but it's such a horrible concept to think of. You're using your right given to you by a constitution, by founding fathers that fought for these rights, and you're using that right to shut down someone else that also has that right. One person does not have more freedom of speech than the other. We all have the equal amount of freedom of speech, which is why it's so dangerous when you see organizations such as Antifa or anti-fascists, for those who don't know what that is. They're out here violently protesting, beating up journalists, anyone who's disagree, anyone who has a camera filming them, which is weird because they cover their faces so that they don't know, so that everyone who's filming them doesn't know who they are. So again, the actual fascists are the ones that call themselves anti-fascists, and they're the ones that, even though they're trying to spread their belief that they are supposedly against fascism, are the ones that are spreading fascism the most. They are a domestic terrorist organization, and I have no fear in saying that because that's what they are. They do nothing but spread fear, and they spread violence, and that's something that needs to be stopped. Now you might be thinking, why can I call for the censoring of Antifa? Well, I mean, it's a bit obvious, but let me go ahead and explain my reasoning. Antifa uses their freedom of speech to call for violence, first of all. So they don't even use speech in most cases. They call for violence, they directly incite violence, and their protests are not peaceful protests like the Constitution protects. They're violent protests that include people getting milkshaked, beaten up. For example, the Andy Ngo story, the Asian reporter. Many of you probably saw the Twitter video of him getting milkshaked, feathered, tarred, beaten, slapped by Antifa members in Portland. And that's all because he had a differing opinion. And that's a future that I hope gets corrected, because the moment that we steer away from the Constitution, and especially that First Amendment, that states that we have freedom of speech, as soon as we have someone that decides that they want to limit freedom of speech, and he or she somehow gets the approval of the legislative branch and the judicial branch, I think that will be the end of what was a truly free America, because that's what this country is. It's a country that fought for its freedom, is free right now, and is one of the best countries in the nation. And I think many of you will not disagree with what I said there, because America is an incredible nation. It's a nation that I'm proud to be a member of, a citizen of. And I hope that everyone who listens to this podcast understands that even though the leftist media, the liberal media, tries to limit your freedom of speech, don't be like them. Don't limit their freedom of speech. Listen to what they say and just prove them wrong with your freedom of speech. That's what I want to spread. To all you young people out there that might be getting bullied by liberals, by leftists, by Democrats, don't be afraid. Listen to their opinions. And no matter how much you disagree with them, you have to listen. Well, you don't have to listen, but you can't stop them from speaking their own opinion. Just listen to them and destroy them with facts, because that's what Ben Shapiro says. Facts don't care about your feelings. Use your statistics, use your facts to prove your point so that they won't bully you anymore, because they know how strong you are with the conservative movement. And just remember, for any conservatives out there that need support, we are out there. We might be hiding a bit, but we are out there. So I hope everyone understands this message. All right, well, that's going to be it for today's episode of The Giraldo Show. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to give it a follow on Podbean and on SoundCloud. I do want to give a quick shout out to my first few followers on Podbean. Shout out to Marcus11. Thank you so much for the support. I really appreciate it. Actually left me a comment recently. He said, "Love the show, Sebastian. Keep up the good work. Best of luck to you." So I highly appreciate that. I also want to give a shout out to my first SoundCloud follower, Mary Miller. Thank you very much for your support. I hope you continue to listen to the show. And that's going to be it for today's episode. Once again, make sure you give it a follow, give it a like, share with friends and family who are part of the conservative movement, and just remember, don't get bullied out there. Spread your opinion and be strong on it, because we're out here and we're going to support you. My name is Sebastian Giraldo, and this is The Giraldo Show.